No.
Yeah.
Did you?
Can
Oh,
you hear me?
yes. Thank you, David.
Perfect. Thanks, Grace.
Okay, it's been a long time since I chaired in person. Right, it's 2:05 now, and I call this meeting to order of the Waterfront Coastal Processes Committee. And we acknowledge with respect that we're meeting on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen speaking peoples, and that we're honored and privileged and pleased to have the opportunity to build strong working relationships with the people of the Songhees and the Esquimalt nations. And moving on to item two, approval of the agenda. Assuming everybody's read the agenda, we don't have any members. Yes, we do. We have one member from Parks Canada online, and I'm not absolutely certain if I'll see when a hand goes up, but I'll ask, is anybody opposed to the agenda as presented? I'm not seeing anything here, nothing online. Okay, no, good, go shake the head there, thank you. So that's approved as presented. And the adoption of the minutes of the last meeting. Again, anybody against? Nobody against, nobody against. Okay, that's approved as presented. Moving on to public participation, I believe we have one person to speak.
It doesn't look like they've joined the meeting.
No, nobody online? Okay, one person was registered, I understand, but they're not there now. And if they do appear and would like to speak later, perhaps we can accommodate that. So new business 5.1. Ian, are you going to lead into this?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So there's a report before the committee, and we've got a recommendation that I'll go over at the end of my introduction. So the city has engaged Associate Engineering to assist with the exploration of options for long-term maintenance, management, and climate adaptation strategies for the coastal sediment systems at Cobourg Peninsula and adjacent coastlines. Nature-based solutions such as beach nourishment were the focus of their analysis based on the city's policy to adhere to green shores and site adaptive planning principles. The technical memorandum that's attached to the staff report was prepared by David Ford of Associate Engineering. The date on that memo should read April 20th, and the signed and sealed version is forthcoming, and we'll have the date corrected. It outlines the outcomes of their work and recommendations for next steps that are attached to the staff report. Based on this work, staff are recommending that the city undertake a study to estimate the lifespans of both existing and new infrastructure. The new infrastructure being what's proposed in the Waterfront Coastal Stewardship Plan. Relative to future sea level rise and storm events based on current profile of Cobourg Peninsula, so that's without additional beach nourishment. It's proposed that this work would be undertaken to better understand the potential lifespan of the existing and proposed infrastructure, and be undertaken before a more costly detailed design of beach nourishment is undertaken. So today we've got David Ford of Associate Engineering joining us to help present his technical memorandum, as well as Dunker Coline of DHI Coastal Modeling Company. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'd like to turn it back to the committee.
Okay. Right. I'm going to take the unusual step of speaking first on this. I want to introduce this in a way of thinking about what's in front of us. So this committee was set up by council to assist it to make decisions on the waterfront because of the processes that are going on that we've been studying for a while now. But right now, council is delayed in taking forward the waterfront improvement plan for the final stage of public comments because they need to know so that they can inform the public what the maintenance costs might be of these waterfront improvements. And I think it's important that this committee move speedily to provide them with an answer on that. So that the waterfront improvement plan can go to the public and see what the public thinks about it and whether it is going to be implemented or what version of it will be implemented. There are other things this committee needs to focus on and decide as well. For instance, the stability of the slope below the high end of Aloha Road is an important factor that we don't have an answer on yet. The safety of the sewage lift station is an important thing. The setting of flood construction levels and tsunami construction levels is important. But it could be argued that nothing's quite as urgent as helping council to move forward with the waterfront improvement plan. And therefore, I propose that that's the first thing we should talk about in relation to the information in front of us. And I would suggest that we should think about asking, in fact, why don't I ask that question to kick it off to the consultants? Are you currently in a position to recommend to the committee what amount of money should be provided within our annual budget for repairs to the waterfront improvements following high water events over the next 20 years? And I recognize that this is not something that would be a regular expenditure each year because there'll be probably plenty of years where there's no damage, but one or two high water events with appropriate storms might cause a lot of damage. So what I'm asking is, given that you know this in much greater detail than we do, much greater depth, if you were sitting in the city engineer's chair and you had to come up with an amount to stick in a reserve to have available to repair the waterfront improvements following a major storm and during high water, how much would you put there?
Hopefully, okay, guys. Struggling with the flu at the moment. I'll let Dunker kind of elaborate in a second, but I think that's what the detailed engineering analysis bullet in our memo speaks to. We don't have as much information to hand to make that call at present because the Colwood Waterfront Stewardship Plan, the improvement project, it's still very conceptual. I believe at this stage, exact elevations, dimensions, materials have not been decided upon to the best of my knowledge. And for us to make an informed engineering cost estimation decision, we would have to factor that into some form of analysis, looking at overtopping and future discharge, wave discharge, basically onto the trail system. I don't know, Dunker, do you want to quickly add?
Yeah, no, I think that's correct, Dave. I mean, at this point, we've really just looked at the report and the plans, sort of the conceptual level, but we haven't dug into the actual elevations or layouts and overlaid on top of that the anticipated wave conditions today and into the future, and also the water levels. So really the next step is to do that, is to understand, you know, how that proposed plan will perform and react to the storm conditions that we know have historically occurred and might occur into the future, and then to pass a assessment on that. And from there, you can really determine the kinds of maintenance and the interval of that maintenance required for that.
So I think I'm hearing you saying that you would have to work with the consultant designing the waterfront improvement plans to better understand what they propose, and possibly that would result in some change in the plan to make it more resistant to the weather that might happen, and then out of that you might be able to come up with a round number that we would be advised to put in a reserve to ensure that we had most of the money, at least, for major repairs should anything happen.
Mhm.
Correct. That's ending. Yeah.
And of course, the first step there being, you know, you mentioned making changes to the plan. I mean, the first step would be really to just see how the proposed layout would perform, and to determine, you know, if any changes were required, or if, you know, the level of potential damages sustained by the plan as it stands today are acceptable within the city's, you know, budget and sort of vision for maintenance requirements. And if it turns out after this assessment that the maintenance is too high, or that there are certain areas that there are, you know, risks that are too high, then, you know, you can move on to proposing solutions to mitigate those risks or reduce maintenance costs to, you know, a level that is acceptable to the city.
Thank you. Right, I open it up to other members of the committee to.
Okay. Fascinated by this line of questioning, and I'd love to get into it. But Michael, I have a reminder note here. You skipped an item on the agenda
Oh, did I?
to call to order the chair and vice chair appointments. You seem to, for 2022. It's on the minutes.
Okay, I don't have that on my agenda on my iPad.
I had it on mine. Anyway, this 1.1 call to order, 1.1 committee update, chair and vice chair selection for 2022. So I would nominate Michael as chair and
I see it.
Dr. Lynn as vice chair.
Okay, so we have nominations for chair and vice chair. Do we have any other nominations? Seeing none, I think we can call that done.
Okay.
No errors in procedure there? Good, okay.
If I may, then to the brainiacs there on the screen. I think if I understood your analysis correctly, you sort of have calculations of overtopping rates that may or may not be acceptable depending on what it is. You had to picked one for the lift station and one for the road at, I think it's in liters per second per meter. With that, and my understanding is at present, the waterfront improvement project is recommending a sort of compacted gravel walkway. Then I guess you also need what is a probability acceptance of that, you know, and Michael gets the cost, you know, at certain rates, I presume we're going to have a little bit of erosion in the gravel path and we'll have to throw some gravel down and compact it. And that's probably not a big deal if that happened every few years. At higher rates, we would have severe erosion and perhaps talk about replacing it. How do we nail that down? I mean, I think we have the waterfront improvement people who sort of go, I mean, my understanding is that they thought they're essentially laying a path on existing ground and doing a bunch of beach nourishment to protect it. I think from what I read in your in your report, the beach nourishment is perhaps getting to be expensive and scary, and we should be looking at how do we avoid it, which again, from your report, sounds like for most of the roadway and for the lift station, we're pretty close to not having to worry for till 2070. So how do you advise us on what the right probability is for erosion of a pathway? And by doing so, do you not sort of go, listen, if you build it at the same height as the road, it's fine, or if you build it lower than the road, it's not so fine? And also, of course, on what side of the road is presumably a different number. My sense is that the damage from wave overtopping and the like on the seaward side is going to be more pronounced, even if the stuff on the lagoon side is at the exact same elevation. I would think that the erosional forces are lesser just by virtue of going over the road and over the berm. So are you guys comfortable that you can lead us through that process, readily, or what do you need from us is the other question.
No, absolutely. And you bring up a whole bunch of really good points and questions. And I think all of this comes down to, two main factors, which is volume of overtopping and frequency. So really, the higher the volume, of course, the more potential erosion can occur. Everything, can be built to withstand a certain volume of run up and overtopping. The issue, of course, is if you get very frequent high volume overtopping on gravel paths, they wash out. But of course, they're pretty easy to replace and fix, as opposed to, say, a paved or pavers, which become very expensive to fix. So really what we tried to do in our assessment was look at 3 locations and imagine the elevation that, I'll calculate, the elevation that the surface needed to be for sort of an acceptable volume of water, which would cause, minimal to negligible damage. It's very normal for some areas to get, wetted and to receive spray or white water, but that wouldn't lead to damages. So really what we need to do is determine the overall envisioned elevations of the entire plan that is currently in place for the waterfront. Then perform the same analysis with these that we did in the workshop, where we look at the run up along the entire plan footprint, and then identify those areas where the elevations may be too low, or where the volume of water that's overtopping occurs too frequently, which would then incur a high maintenance cost. So it's not necessarily a very complex assessment. It's just a matter of having the details from the designers of the stewardship plan to cross-reference that with the wave climate and the kinds of conditions we can anticipate into the future, and then doing a systematic analysis to determine where there are areas that are vulnerable, and vulnerable being prone to high volume wave run-up occurring frequently. And with frequently, we would be talking about several times per year, and we can define those kinds of thresholds. Whether or not you're concerned about annually there's one event typically that causes some damage, or perhaps you want it to only occur every 5 years. I mean, you can nail down all those kinds of specific requirements. So we could work with you to say, okay, we are willing to accept some minor to moderate damages on an annual basis once per year, and some moderate to medium damages once every 5 years. And once you specify those kinds of tolerances, then we can go back and look at, well, what does that mean for elevating the peninsula and for potentially protecting certain areas on the seaward side from that occurring. So that might require, changes to the vegetation plantings, maybe some woody debris. Maybe you're using a combination of small boulder rock material and crushed gravels to create somewhat more resilient beach surfaces. So definitely there's a combination of things you can do, and yeah, that's really a two-way dialogue of what your tolerance limits are. It's a bit of a long-winded answer, but there's at the end of the day, it comes down to how frequently are you willing, or how frequently are you okay with some sort of damages occurring, and that is a function of the volume of water you allow onto a surface. That's really what it comes down to.
Thank you. That's a great answer. The only sort of issue that came to mind as you were speaking was it's not really a two-way process. It's got to be a three-way, because I think there's going to be some iteration with the waterfront improvement plan. You could, there are things that could change, the elevation, the materials, all that kind of stuff, and so we have to make sure that everybody will come to the optimal solution by combining all that stuff. So, but I'm very heartened by your words there. Thank you.
Very good point. Completely agree. This has to be very collaborative with, the city, the designers of the plan, and then the engineers looking carefully at the components of that plan, and then making recommendations, and then the planners confirming whether those are also possible within the context of the overall plan.
Mr. Chair, if I'm
Sorry.
thought a clarifying point might be helpful. So the body of work that's being recommended, the detailed engineering analysis, would include estimates for operating and maintenance costs long-term as it relates to the proposed infrastructure in the waterfront stewardship plan.
Right. I would hope that we would come up with a much more specific recommendation than that, though, at the end of this. Thank you.
Through the chair. Yeah, as far as your annual costs are concerned and cleanup after storms, I know it's not quite the same. We're not comparing apples to apples clearly, maybe apples to pears, but what's our annual cost now? I know we don't have the walkways in, but what is it that we're paying now when we get a storm? I mean, the city of Victoria with Ross Bay, even though they've done all that work, they do get overtopping at times. And but anyway, what I'm getting at is there must be some kind of an idea what the costs are. And then, like I say, it's, and like Mr. Baxter said, it's not every year. Okay, so as far as the pathways are concerned and what damage can be done to them because of the storms, well, from what I can see is that we're going to be going down on the ocean side from the sewage lift station halfway down approximately to the rifle berm. Then we go across. Well, that is a higher elevation than the other half, which it recedes down near the bridge. Would it not be prudent for the walkways that we're going to put there that we have, especially on the seaward side, we got lots of logs there, pin logs, like have them driven right in. So that'll act as a sort of a buffer to stop some of any kind of erosion or whatever that's going to happen. And then the material we use, I think we were talking 1/4 inch minus packed down, but we got a good example of, they've done it already and it seems to work quite successful, is by the old degaussing hut, that little hump near the sewage lift station. And that's the 1/4 inch minus, I believe, over that netting, that plastic netting. It seems to work pretty good. And I don't recall any time where it's wiped out or whatever. And it'll kind of stabilize things. So then when you go down the other side, across the rifle berm, and then heading down on the lagoon side, well, you can do much the same. You could pin logs on the lagoon side, but you're not going to get really storm overtopping on that side, because it's from the southeast gale is on the windward side where all the damage occurs. So you're kind of in the same kind of boat. What you're going to be faced with there is a king tide and a storm with a storm surge, lifting logs up and bringing them on, moving them over. Again, you could pin logs or whatever, or have it set up perched high enough that would try to eliminate that. And with the perch logs, that'll eliminate some of them and minimize any kind of cleanup. And So having said that, we were talking about, Mr. Perkins was saying the beach nourishment. Well, I think that's a different issue compared to this. Correct me if I'm wrong, the beach nourishment is another issue altogether. But the beach nourishment will work hand in glove as to prevent the run-up, and it can be done so many years. But wouldn't that the beach nourishment in conjunction with groins placed with, if we take baby steps to see where we're going, to put them in key spots, especially in the lower part, which we could mitigate some of this damage potentially. And as far as bringing the sand up, well, that can be easily accommodated with the heavy equipment, with those big dumpsters running along the beach at high tide and depositing on certain spots. Just thoughts at large on that. Thank you.
Yeah, so there's a lot of good stuff in that comment overall. I mean, I think in general, the nourishment strategy, what we really want is to work with the natural currents and the transport rates that occur, and they go from the south kind of towards the northwest of the beach. So putting the nourishment material in place, the most strategic way to do this is to put it all in one location where it can be carried up coast and redistributed naturally. And the reason that's important is because then you keep your existing beach slope that you currently have. The beach doesn't get any steeper, which means that the wave breaking occurs a little bit further offshore. We also know that the beach itself has a seasonal cycle to it, so it grows during the summer, and then in the winter during storms, some of that material is carried offshore in shallow bars that sit out front of that beach. We also know that the material over time has been collecting towards the lagoon opening in the northwest, and that material is actually available for use, and we could recycle that material. Groin structures themselves can be pretty tricky to construct along the entire peninsula. There's a couple of things it would, if you build it in the wrong place, you get all this sediment building up behind the groin, but then you get sediment starving on the other side of the groin, so you could produce vulnerabilities along the beach. So we have to be very careful about where you place them and how you place them. And once you start placing one, you often have to place another one and another one and another one, so it can quickly get a little bit costly. And also, it would change the aesthetic of the beach significantly. You would start to see wouldn't look very natural. The only place where a groin could be beneficial is at the very, very end towards the lagoon opening, where you could build a groin that collects the sediment, where then every 5 or so years or 7 years you go and collect it at the end of the beach towards the northwest, and then move that sediment back down again to the south, and constantly let the system work that sediment up the beach until you re-nourish that. That could be an option. Otherwise, I would not really recommend going down the route of starting to place groins along the beach. It would be a very challenging strategy and costly. So that's the comment on nourishment. In terms of using woody debris to stabilize the beach, I think in general, the debris could be used quite well to stabilize areas higher up on the beach near the toe of the dune. Usually these structures work really well when you have a bit of a dynamic dune system where sediment can collect in behind and around the woody debris structures themselves. There are some issues with tacking down this woody debris. It can be sometimes dangerous. So you'd have to look at that a little bit carefully. But overall, you want to maybe look at the bigger picture of the overall system, which really comes down to the elevation of the road, the width of the beach available in front of the road to protect it. And really to achieve a wide beach, you need to nourish, and to get the elevation to avoid excessive inundation of the road, you need to raise it. And that's where you can start looking at strategic points along the peninsula where the road is currently very low and determining whether or not in the long term you want to start thinking about raising those. And if you do raise those, is there enough room in front of that road for a wide enough beach to protect it? And then, so those are all the recommendations that we made and looked at in the workshop that we gave. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Dave.
No, I think the issues are definitely interrelated. I think action developed by kind of allowing the beach nourishment issue to kind of continue or lack thereof, the foreshore will get steeper. All of these issues are interrelated, and we're very sympathetic to the fact that it's kind of hard to know where to bite off basically this issue first. I think the detailed engineering analysis that Donker described would be a really good starting point, because it would help put some engineering numbers and figures and values to the waterfront improvement plan. And at least then you guys will have a very good instinct or estimate of how that will cost you going forward on an annual basis every 5 years, 10 years. And then that could be, you know, a good value investment for you guys relative to the beach nourishment, or you could keep going and check the beach nourishment analysis and see which is your best bang for your buck. It's just, I think you guys don't have all the information to hand yet to make a decision. And I think that's basically what Councillor Baxter and Councillor Parkinson were kind of driving at in your initial comments. You need to see those values and those figures. So we're very sympathetic to that fact.
Mr. Chair, if I could add, the proposed detailed engineering analysis is also intended to look at the existing elevations of Ocean Boulevard along Cobourg Peninsula, as well as the elevations of the riprap and lock block structures that protect the pump station. So the intention is that we'd be looking at both proposed and existing infrastructure in key areas along Cobourg Peninsula. The estimated costs, I should highlight, and the staff report were incorrect. They stated $20,000 to $30,000 for the detailed engineering analysis. In the draft technical memorandum that was submitted by Associate Engineering, they're stated to be $40,000 to $60,000, which is the correct numbers. That amount could be covered by the monies budgeted for the coastal studies in 2022.
Any other comment?
If I may. And this is a question I think perhaps for Ian or maybe David and Dunker, but I guess my thinking from the committee point of view, what we're trying to do, I sort of see a number of tasks. You know, we had the flood level and tsunami thing, and I understand that that's, you know, in hand in Colwood, and they're looking at what to do with bylaws and stuff like that. So that will come separate from what we're talking about today, but it's under control, as I understand. There's what I call the Aloha slope area where the bank sloughed, and you know, how bad is that, and what's going to happen as sea level rises and eats away the toe and stuff. And again, I understand that that's separate from this issue that's being looked at within the city. The sediment or beach nourishment process, if I understand correctly, is a bigger chunk of work to figure out what to do. Perhaps not as urgent, but again, separate from what we're talking about today, or at least at this point. And then the analysis that's coming is sort of really better be all the information we need to finalize the waterfront improvement project and give us some guidance on the lift station. Although with the lift station, there's issues with the lock block walls. Are they built right? And, you know, is there things that should be done within the station? So I think we have those sort of, to me, 4 separate branches of what we're doing on this committee. And this all sounds like the right place to start. I don't personally want to dive into a humongous beach nourishment exercise just at this point until we figure out some of the other stuff. So am I on the right track in that understanding that the other branches are to come, but this is the one we can put a stake in and say is done soon?
Through the chair, yes. With respect to the Aloha slope issue, staff are working with the consultants to develop a report. that we expect in the next quarter or so will indicate whether adjacent properties need to be looked at in terms of the stability of that slope. We also wish to advance the waterfront stewardship plan concurrent with the proposed detailed engineering work. We're really looking at this this work as part of the design process that would flow from the decision to move forward with the waterfront stewardship plan. And we could certainly add wording to the plan that states very clearly that validation through detailed engineering needs to happen before moving forward with specific design decisions.
Through the chair. We just mentioned about the groins at the lagoon end. I'm 100% behind that. I think we've discussed this before. The groin at the true spit end would serve two purposes: as a catchment basin, and plus the fact it would protect the bridge. Because going back in history, not too long ago, when there was still lots of sand from the pit, that was a natural berm that protected the bridge from any storms. Currently, right now, it's all gone. It's all flattened out. And so when we get these severe southeast gales, those breakers come rolling in and they hit those abutments. And that's what caused that undermining about 10 years ago, because that would never have occurred when it was the natural berm that was there in the past because of the constant nourishment. But having said that, I think I mentioned previously that in the 1950s, when the military were still very active down there, they used to bring in backhoes at that time and build it up even more. And because there was a house, if you can believe it, there was a house way out there that some old sea captain was, and this was before the Second World War. But they used to build that up to create that to the higher berm to protect the bridge, and that's when there was still sand coming in. So the idea of putting a groin in there, and especially extending it out quite a bit, I think that should be one of the most paramount ones to go along with this project. It would serve a number of purposes. Thank you.
Well, I guess for one thing, we've kind of hogged the floor. I don't know if David and Dunker sort of were probably had a different direction for the meeting to go here or not. We should let them talk if they have things to say, but otherwise I'd be prepared to move the recommendation.
No, guys, it's your party. We're quite happy to support wherever needed, but definitely we've nothing further to add. We'd love to be involved in the detailed engineering analysis. As I said, I think from myself and Donker's perspective, it's probably the right direction to go in, and I'll arm you with the information that you guys were searching for at the start of the meeting. Don't know, Donker, if you have anything else to add.
Yeah, no, I'll second that. I think there's a lot of good comments here from the committee. Clearly, I think everyone really understands the situation and decisions that need to be made. And we're very happy to support and provide all the information, that is necessary to really pin down that the call with the plan, overall the waterfront plan, is a resilient and sustainable plan from an engineering perspective into the medium to the future.
So, Councillor Parkinson, I believe you said that you wanted to move forward with the recommendation, but if I can try and dissuade you from that, I have a far more specific resolution I'd like to put in front of the committee. As I look at the recommendation, I don't think it's very specific at all about what we get out of that, and I think we've been at this for more than a year, and it's time to get very specific. So then I would like to move the following, that we recommend to council that staff work with the consultant for the waterfront improvement plan and with A&E and the other technical consultants to obtain a recommendation for an amount to be placed in reserve for repairs to the waterfront improvements following a major storm during high water, and how often they might expect that that would be required. That this be done with the aim of optimizing design and construction methods to minimize the amount of damage and therefore the cost of the repairs that might be required. So that's my motion. And I don't intend that that would be an exclusive motion. There can be further motions on other parts of this, but I would like to put that forward.
Mr. Chair, I just request for clarification. The work that you specified is envisioned by staff to be included in the body of work that's recommended. So might I recommend that the specification be, or the specified wording be added to the staff recommendation such that the committee can have assurances that that's there?
You can suggest that, but I'm not going to go with that. We can have further motions to expand on other work that we require, but I just want this one specific thing to deal with the waterfront improvement plan and make sure that we move forward with that. So any discussion?
I have some discussion on that. By changing the recommendation, you're basically changing the whole scope of what the engineering studies are going to do. How much is that going to cost? When is that going to be available? I mean, the original proposal was a simple engineering study with a given cost, and that information to me is vital to further design and further work on the beach. So by changing it to just vaguely consulting with staff and consulting with the people designing the improvements, I think you're leaving out the engineering part of it. What is the overtopping going to do and where is the damage going to happen? If we don't do that study, then all of the other stuff is just, I don't know, verbiage. It's arguing from being blind. So I would support the idea of your motion with the engineering study tacked onto that specifically.
Okay, if I can ask a question then, with the engineering study to do what? I don't see in this resolution any particulars nor a cost.
Well, I believe the engineering study was to analyze existing infrastructure, like the work around the sewage lift station, analyze the impact of that on overtopping, and analyze where, in more detail, where overtopping is going to be and how often. Right now, we don't have very good information on that. And it kind of means they're going to be staff and the consultants doing the beach planning are going to be basically planning in the dark. So to me, the engineering facts are a very important part of the whole process.
Thank you. Any further comments?
I'm going to ask for the motion to be read back again. I guess I'm a little confused here.
Okay.
Is that possible? Oh, I guess you've got it.
Would you like me to read it? Okay. Recommend to council that staff work with the consultant for the waterfront improvement plan and with A&E and the other technical consultants to obtain a recommendation for an amount to be placed in reserve for repairs to the waterfront improvements following a major storm during high water and how often that might be required. This to be done with the aim of optimizing design and construction methods to minimize the amount to minimize the amount of repairs that would be required. So obviously there is engineering involved in that since but I think a key part of that is that the we need the engineering consultants to work with the Waterfront improvement consultant to optimize the construction for the improvements. I believe you have the floor, Councillor Parkins.
Thank you. I was just going to check with David and Dunker whether this motion changes anything that you had proposed doing.
In my mind, it doesn't. I think what the crux is we haven't given you guys a proposal letter with a work plan and key deliverables, and Ian is more than welcome. But we would be happy to provide a proposal letter with key deliverables and a work plan that would specify exactly what you'd be getting out of it. And we would work with Paul and his team in developing that, I'm sure. But nothing that you've said kind of contradicts our thinking.
Mr. Chair, if I could just add, so the recommended analysis is described in a little bit more detail than the recommendation in section 4.2 of the technical memorandum on page 7. And the scope as described in the technical memorandum is broader than the motion that was made. So we should clarify whether it is the committee's wishes to reduce the scope or to maintain the proposed scope as intended through the staff recommendation.
Well, I'm going to ask the committee.
So,
Well, through the chair, wouldn't it be not prudent if we get a proposal from you folks and it's written in that it's the working agreement with the city staff, appropriate city staff, and appropriate members of this committee that we could meet and we could all work in a collaboratively, because I mean there's a lot of knowledge in-house, and I'm not going to say outhouse, but on the outside here. And if we work in collaboration, and that's the way I used to work with consultants in my working career, and it worked a lot better than just having a consultant going off in the hinterland. He comes back with this wild ass stuff, pardon the expression, and the next thing you know, well, what are we doing here? This is not what we wanted, or this is going to cost such and such. Well, I think you can eliminate a lot of this if you have a strong working committee that can go forward. Now, but it's not the beach nourishment again. The beach nourishment is one thing, but doing the thing with Paul, with the landscape architect, that's sort of, I mean, I know it's all tied together in the end, but that's a separate issue per se. One is dealing with rising potential seawater rise level. It's dealing with storms. It's dealing with a bunch of other things. But I think we can probably do them all at once. And as far as the sewage lift station is concerned, I think it's like a lone bastion out there. Those blocks have been, how many layers have been put up. I haven't heard of any logs going through the air vents. Have you, Michael? No, I don't know. No, it seems to be holding its own. Was it the best location for that place? Absolutely not. But there was political reasons at the time. But in the meantime, yeah, well, she's still hanging in there. And we've gone through some humdinger of storms, and there's a roaring of waves, and boy, oh boy, it's something else. Well, still there, just like Fisgard Lake. So I say, I recommend Councillor Parkinson's concept when we worked collaboratively together. And I don't want to use your words, Mr. Parkinson. Didn't you say that it was time to fish or cut bait?
no, you said that, but I did agree with you.
Thank you.
I think the situation we're in, and I'll admit to you that I'm struggling a little bit from behind because I've just been away for 10 days working on some extremely difficult family issues. I got back late last night and my brain is still a little fog bound despite all the coffee I've drunk. But I think that we have in front of us in the form of the memorandum a good assessment of what work needs to be done. But as Dave was saying, we don't have a precise proposal with a timeline and precise costs. Am I out to lunch in saying that?
As chair, our expectation that this work would be done within this calendar year, we haven't worked out specific timelines. The best information we can provide at this time in terms of costs is that figure in the memorandum of $40,000 to $60,000. So, and I just add that a total of $60,000 was budgeted for coastal studies in 2022.
Okay, I've got to say I'm concerned that it's April, almost May, and we need to have a decision on this waterfront improvement plan well before November, because otherwise things start to go in a different direction, and everything that gets carried over that kind of event gets put back in the ringer. And I think the community's already given enough input on this to change it considerably, and the community needs a chance to give its final input and decide what they actually want. And to do that, they need costs. So hence my very specific motion, which I would assume that staff would devolve into a specific agreement with the consultant, and the costs would be within budget. And then you would be able to bring back to us very specific recommendations, which we could take to council, and they could move forward with the waterfront improvement plan. Everything else that we might want to do, including examining the pump station, can also be the subject of a motion at this time or at the next meeting. But this particular motion is aimed at one particular result. So having said that, are there any more comments on this motion? If not, I'll take it to a vote. I'm not seeing any. So we're going to call a vote. All those for the motion? And that makes at least 4 of us. Noel? Are you for or against the motion?
I'd be for the motion.
Okay, so that motion passes. Am I looking for, am I seeing any other proposals?
I just wanted to double check with David and Dunker that they're good to go and we can rush through this expeditiously. Or are you confused with the instructions?
I think it'll become clearer once we have a chat with Ian and Paul, and we put a proposal together. But what we've outlined doesn't conflict with what you guys have chatted about. We'll just try and expedite it as quickly as possible, as always.
Many thanks.
Okay, seeing no more movement by the committee, I look for a motion to adjourn. Motion to adjourn. Any objections? None. We're adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.